For our COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard, Mike, and Ellen here with something we're super excited about. In the last few months, we've gotten to know Martin Viecha. He's an advisor with MV Motion Advisory. That's his own firm, his own research shop. He really focuses on robotaxis, human robots, all the automated, robotic, fancy technology that is out there in today's world. Before this, he was head of investor relations at Tesla, so an incredible experience there. And before that, he was a sell-side research analyst. He's got a long history with technology, investing, and kind of Silicon Valley-based thinking. And the reason I mention that is this is the second now of our California Summer Series. We're digging into all the cool things in and around California, and Martin is definitely one of them. So, Martin, thank you so much for joining. We were delighted to have you here in Houston. I guess it was 6-7 weeks ago now, but thanks for joining today. We can't wait to dig in and talk about everything from humanoids to robotaxis to anything else on your mind.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to cover all of these topics.
Well, we're excited, and let me pause, Mike, as I turn it to you. This is our second California show. I've got to say thank you to the TAE team, the fusion company we saw last week in Los Angeles. We got some fantastic bling from them. We had a great show. So welcome to the California second show, Mike. You're virtually in California right now.
Yep. I mean, I took one of the hats, TAE hats this morning, so
nice.
Happy about that. I'll be wearing that in the weekend.
There you go. Well, this is a shameless attempt to get more cool companies to send us bling.
Exactly.
That's exactly. Ellen outed me. I told her I was going to do this.
Exactly.
That's exactly what you're doing.
Well, Maynard, one of the things, I wanted to talk about, I'll make it pretty concise and quick here, but I mean, we talked about it earlier this week, but the next few weeks, we're just going to be bombarded by earnings reports, just across the market, across energy sector as well. And so we'll talk about that here, and we'll talk about it for the next few weeks. But just quickly on bonds, we talked about it yesterday. Bond yields keep inching up. They're continuing to inch up today. That's giving the market a little bit of pause. I'd say from an equity market standpoint, the Dow's up around 100, 125 today. S&P's up 1/4 point. But I think what's really interesting is what's going on here in the S&P 500. And you're also seeing in some of the energy sectors as well as expectation going into earnings. Today, GE Vernova, one of the hottest stocks last year, the last 2 years, as a matter of fact. I mean, business remains fantastic there. They didn't basically hit expectations, and the stock down 8 or 9% today. Like I said, business still looks great, but the stock is down because expectations were high going into the quarter. And so I think you're going to see this throughout the next couple of weeks, as it relates to, the big companies are reporting here in the next, couple of days. You've got Google, IBM, and Tesla. They're all reporting after the market today, so expect some excitement tomorrow. As far as, and then you have Intel reporting, the day after that. So really heavy week for big heavyweights. I'd say from an oil and gas standpoint, the thing that really stood out to me today was sort of the Saudi, U.S. nuclear agreement. I thought that was pretty amazing. Short on specifics, but I mean, that's interesting. We're going to continue to see news on the nuclear side. As far as oil and gas today, specifically oil, WTI is up another couple bucks, obviously because of tensions in the Middle East. Brent's at roughly $94 a barrel. WTI is at 86. And so until we have something basically calm down there, you're just going to see pressure on, oil prices. We've come a long way. We're up about $15 to $16 here in the last week and a half to 2 weeks. And so we'll see where we go from here. I say, last thing I really want to talk about is in the energy sector. We talked about, just a second ago about GE Vernova missing expectations and stock getting hit. On the other side, we had Weatherford report this morning. Expectations were low. They really kind of set out an interesting environment for the rest of this year into next year, more optimistic than I would expect it. And the stock's up 8 to 9% today. So I think my point here is that expectations are high for a lot of stocks. You're going to see a lot of volatility here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. You got to start to look through that volatility because it is what it is. So that's where we are today. Equitable reported, Range reported today. Later this week, actually next couple of days, we're going to get Liberty, Kinder Morgan, and you're going to have an Oceaneering report in the next 12, 24 hours. And so everyone's going to be focused on those names. So bottom line is, it's going to be a heavy earnings, weeks over the next 2 or 3 weeks. There's going to be a lot of volatility. We're going to be on top of it. So send it back to you.
Very interesting. I think, we don't talk about it a ton in this forum, but when we look at the space that we care about, energy, power, tech, the supply chains, everything connected to it, it's something like 400 public stocks. So that's why Mike consumes a lot of coffee.
Me and my triplets, right?
Yeah. Well, Ellen, it's great to have you. I think this is Ellen's second COBT, Martin, but Ellen works on the venture investing side of Veritan. So, if you like technology, you can't miss the session with Martin Viecha. So, Martin, welcome. We could jump in anywhere. I think maybe one way to jump in is what I shared with you is when we think about our audience and ourselves, everybody in our community loves energy and power and tech, but we shared with you, this is probably a topic that we have under discussed. It's not something that energy and power people perhaps speak as a first language. So getting to visit with you about automation, robotaxis, and certainly robots, this is a great add to our discussion. So thanks again, and let's start wherever you want to. You're the man.
Absolutely. I think, I just wanted to say that I think there is the information about the robotaxi industry in general is just so scattered. And I think a lot of people that I meet all across the world sort of still see robotaxis as a bit of a pie in the sky, very, very long-term thing, not something that's necessarily happening, today, here and now. And, living in San Francisco Bay Area, you're sort of in the epicenter of, Zoox, Tesla, Waymo, just so many different companies, having actual deployments in the city. It's a service that you use on a regular basis. You see that there's no driver. This works. It's, it's become a commonplace. And it's not only that, it's the pace at which this technology spreads to new cities, I think is starting to open the eyes of, many investors and many companies across the US that, okay, this is not a Silicon Valley thing. This is going to become a US-wide thing within the next 12 months. I mean, within the next 12 months, Waymo is going to cover, easily 30 cities. And maybe 10% of the U.S. population will have access to Waymo robotaxis. And that's not even including all the other companies that are also trying to do the same thing. So I like to think that within the next year or so, this is going to be, the robotaxi topic is going to go from like a little niche, something maybe happening in the valley to, hey, this is going to completely change the way we drive, we move goods, it's completely changed the world of insurance, safety, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is happening today.
Hey, Martin, one way to think about that, and this is why it's such a great California show, because this illustrates, California's ability to innovate and embrace, and it's cultural. When a place is rapidly adopting, Waymos, for instance, what do you see from a regulatory standpoint? What is it the city is doing to make that? Talk about the conditions that make Waymo spread, whatever they are. I think we'd all be curious on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's no coincidence that the main states where Waymo is expanding is California, Texas, and Florida. Like those are the three states that offer, very good conditions for robotaxis. And they also had a lot of large cities, so it's like an obvious fit for robotaxi companies and various municipalities. By far the most permitted region in anywhere in the world is California. So at the moment, Waymo is permitted to cover 70% of Californian population. So basically anywhere from the north of LA all the way down to the Mexican border is already permitted by the DMV for Waymo. And in the North California, it's basically all of the San Francisco Bay Area, all the way to Sacramento.
Martin, I have to stop you because I think this is the first time in COBT history where someone has talked about the speed of California permitting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a matter of that it's just been happening for so many years that, I think Waymo has really paved the way of, how to push this through. And ultimately, their winning argument, and I think it should be a winning argument with every city in the US, it's still not, but it should be, is the safety. Like, because the company has done, way over 200 million miles with no driver on board, and they can absolutely prove that this is 9 times safer or 10 times safer for severe injuries and maybe 6 to 7 times safer for non-severe injuries. Like, it is a complete step change in safety. So I think that, combined with the fact that Waymo has been in San Francisco Bay Area for just so many years, I think was the convincing factor here. But you're right, it's definitely not. In other industries, it's probably a slightly different story.
I'm curious, Martin, how I do, not to make this all about California, but I was thinking, for instance, California has the labor laws on the minimum wage, and it has real sensitivity around displacing workers, so to speak, if I could just generalize like that. And so how did California's culture get its head around displacing drivers, if you will? What do you mind wading into that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things to remember. So number one, the job of a driver is actually the most common job in the world. So this is the displacement of jobs is going to continue to be a real and a relevant debate for quite some time across the world, not just in the US. But like, ultimately, I think, as we've seen in just so many technological waves across history, there are some jobs that are just going to be, are going to become less and less relevant over time. And it means that, population will start focusing on, different types of jobs will be created as a result of that. And I think this is going to be, a similar scenario. Ultimately, the number of people who die, in the US, outside of the US, mainly by staring at their phone while driving, that's a very, very significant killer, is just too significant to ignore. So if a company can come and say, hey, we can cut that by 90%, that's something that every state and every government should be listening to.
And I was just thinking, Martin, to get ready, we've all looked at your robotaxi overview and your humanoid robot overview. So maybe we'll focus a little bit on the first one, and then we'll move to the second one. And so Ellen and Mike, jump in here. I'll throw one more out, which is, so you talked about the kind of the underlying conditions to let robotaxis flourish. So you have permits and data and availability and regulatory wise, like everything's in place. What are the keys to the market uptake where people say, I really want this service, where you see it's not just available, but people really liking it. Any clues there?
You're actually touching upon a really, really good point, which is the fact that it's statistically safer doesn't mean that people actually feel safer. So I personally know many, many people who tell me that they would never sit into a robotaxi, or they would never let their kids be in a robotaxi. And even if I tell them, like, hey, statistically, this is 10 times safer than a human, like, this is actually by far the right thing to do, it is going to take some time. And I think that's exactly why Waymo's marketing, if you saw any of their sort of recent marketing, is very, very focused on safety. It's basically convincing people that don't postpone this. This technology is here. You can start taking rides with us today, and you are going to be safer. So I think from my experience, when people take their first ride, that's when it really clicks. That's when they're like, okay, I'm sold. This is just so much nicer and better, and it doesn't drive erratically. It drives very, very calmly but confidently at the same time. The car is clean, quiet. You can set your own temperature. You can play your own music. You don't have anyone you need to talk to. It's just a fundamentally better experience. And because of that, Waymo has been charging quite a significant premium over Uber and Lyft, at least in the Bay Area. Easily 20% more expensive per mile than their human-driven counterparts. And I think it is because they can say that this is a better service, and as a result, at least for now, it requires a premium. But that sort of marketing push, I think, is aimed both at policymakers. We've known about issues in Washington, D.C., New York City, et cetera, where the company is ready to go, ready to launch their service, but there's just still many hurdles to go through. So they're speaking to both the policymakers as well as the end users. I think the time to conversion is very quick. Like, at least from my community, anyone who has tried it once has either gotten converted or has gotten very close to saying, okay, I get the hype now. This is genuinely better.
Ellen is nodding.
Yeah.
Have you been in a Waymo?
Well, I'll jump in, Martin, because your last statement resonates with me because I drive a Tesla and I use full self-driving regularly. And I had the experience you just said, which is when I bought my car, I went and test drove it and literally used the FSD once and didn't go test drive a single other car because I was like, this is so incredible. I'm going to use this all the time. And so I ended up, purchasing the vehicle. But I guess to that point, you focus a lot on Waymo, I think, here. From the technology perspective that I like to focus on, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of comparing and contrasting, the technology stack that Waymo has, which is between the software, the sensors, the LiDAR, everything they use, versus Tesla, which is a camera focused model, and it they have all this proprietary data set. And so be curious to hear your thoughts on the two and compare and contrast, user interface, safety features of and where the future is going between, the hardware piece of it and the software and data piece of it. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to dive into that topic as well. So I use Tesla FSD every single day and have done for over 5 years now. I was one of the first users of FSD when it became available to a handful of employees at that time. It's kind of unbelievable that 5 years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago when I tried it, and whenever it would do an intersection correctly, it would be like, yes, it's finally done it the right way. That's amazing. And now I basically use it 100% of the time, and I don't even think about it. Like, it just does the right thing every single time, and it's not even on my mind that I obviously need to supervise it. I want to make sure that in that very, very tail end on a highway, etc., that I'm in control. But it just drives unbelievable well, and it just kudos to the team, how far they've been able to push this technology. When it comes to the whole debate on sensor suite, et cetera, I think there's a couple of things to think about. I think the camera only approach, which is used by Tesla and to some extent Wave in London, which is another autonomous driving company. The logic is, if you as a human can see it, whatever it is that is in front of you, then the camera can see it as well, right? Like, there's no, you as a human just drive with vision only, and this vehicle has vision only across 8 different cameras. So in theory, you can see everything the car can see. The really the nuance here is, number one, is a camera equivalent to a human eye? And the answer is not really. The camera is always attentive. It's always looking at a 360 angle. It's always, its reaction time is way better. All of these things are like in favor of the camera compared to a human eye. But the human eye has a much better visibility at night and a much better resolution. So, a camera on an autonomous car with a 5 megapixel in case of Tesla, 8 megapixel in case of Rivian, and 17 megapixel in case of Waymo. So clearly the number of pixels matter. Otherwise, Waymo wouldn't be, adding all these extra megapixels to their cameras. Human eye is more than 100 megapixel resolution. So in other words, human will see much further in a lot more detail when necessary than 5 or 8 megapixel camera will. And then there's the night vision, right? Like if you're looking in front of yourself, then of course you have headlights and you see everything perfectly. But if it's on the side or the back, in a very dark environment, the human night vision in those very, very particular cases is just a little bit better. That said, I think, because the reaction time is so much better, because the cameras don't get distracted, because you have a 360 view non-stop, I do think that it should be absolutely possible to make a camera-only system safer than a human. The second question is, can it be safer than a system that has LiDARs and radars and cameras and everything else? And the answer is probably not. And the reason is that there's going to be always that super, super long tail of scenarios, very old scenarios, in fog, heavy rain, super low visibility for some whatever reason, where a system with all these sensors will see in a superhuman way. And as a result, you might be able to go from, I'm going to make up numbers, from 5x safer than a human to 50x safer than a human, because your vision becomes just so much more superhuman than a camera-only system that there might be some gap. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but that's, that's like...
No, it absolutely does. And then I think the follow-up question becomes, cost, right? Like, can you get there from a cost perspective with a single technology? Can you get close enough to, or good enough there with a cheaper technology or a single technology versus this suite of technologies, and what that means from a cost comparison perspective to make this, prolific, so to speak?
Absolutely. I think it's a really, really good question. And I think one of the, it's a fascinating debate that I think is getting way more airtime than it should. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. There's a lot of discussion about, hey, how do we make this vehicle cheaper? We need to cut the cost of the vehicle itself as much as possible. When we think about the amount of mileage these vehicles do, we always need to think about it when it comes to cost per mile, not the overall cost. So if you have an $80,000 robotaxi versus a $30,000 robotaxi, it might feel like the cost difference is monumental, but at the end of the day, if the vehicle will do, well over 600,000 miles over its lifetime, which it will. So an average Waymo does currently about 71,000 miles a year. Longevity of these vehicles easily 8 years over its life cycle. So when you divide that price difference or cost difference of the vehicle by all of those miles that the vehicle covers, you get a cost difference of, teens of cents per mile. It is just not significant enough today. It will be, today the, price per mile of a Waymo is easily $4 to $5 a mile. So, 10 cents here, 10 cents there, it just doesn't make that much of a difference. Of course, in the longer term, when, a ride in the robotaxi costs sub-dollar a mile, then yes, you're going to be looking at every single way you can cut that cost to be the most profitable you can be, or to be the most competitive you can be. But at the moment, the cost of the vehicle or the cost of sensors, it's really, it's not important when it comes to cost per mile. The two biggest, most important costs per mile, and I think they're, again, not debated enough, are number one, utilization rate. So today, a company like Uber would have roughly 56% utilization rate in New York City. So 56% of the miles traveled by an Uber car are paid miles, and the remaining 44% are non-paid miles when the vehicle is going from one customer to another. Well, Waymo today in California is at 60% utilization, very, very high level of utilization, because you basically have this single system, this single Big Brother-esque system where you control your full fleet of well over 1,000 cars, and you can direct them anywhere you want in any way you want. So you can maximize your utilization rate, minimize your empty miles. So utilization rate, incredibly important for the cost. And then secondly is robotaxi to teleoperator ratio. So when robotaxi companies start, there's usually a ratio of, one robotaxi per one teleoperator, because the company is just starting out. And of course, having a driver in an office for an office salary is in no way cheaper than having a driver inside the vehicle. But then, as the company gets better and better, that there's more robotaxis that a single teleoperator can absorb. So then the company goes to 3 robotaxis per teleoperator, then 10 robotaxis per teleoperator, et cetera, et cetera. Waymo, I think, based on their last congressional hearing a few months ago, is at about 43 robotaxis per teleoperator, which is, based on our knowledge, the best in the industry. It is that ratio that has a huge impact on your cost curve. So you want to make sure that the software is so good that your teleoperator needs are next to nothing.
Yeah, Martin, this might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Now we're all excited.
Yeah, I know. Who do you view as the major competitor of these robo-taxis? Is it Uber, or is it the average person buying a vehicle? Who is most at threat, at least in the near term, their business model?
I think it's a really good question, and it's a huge debate these days whether the ride-hailing companies, how are they going to be impacted, et cetera, et cetera. I think that ultimately what the ride-hailing companies are trying to do, and I think I think there's a good chance that they'll succeed in this strategy to some extent, is that they want to make sure there are as many robotaxi companies as possible, and then they will be the booking.com of robotaxi companies. So when you go to different cities, there might be one robotaxi company strong in Dallas and a different robotaxi company strong in Chicago, and a different one that is just trying to get into to work well in Toronto, for example, etc. And your ride-hailing company will be just the aggregator of all of that demand for or all of that supplies of various robotaxi companies. There's one quick chart that I wanted to show you that I think is very relevant for this topic, and this is one of the main arguments for by ride-hailing companies why a combination of robotaxis and human-driven cars is going to be necessary. So this chart that I'm showing right now is a chart published by Waymo, published by Uber a few months ago. And without the number of robotaxis, we sort of calculated that. And this shows the city of Austin, and it shows the light blue area is the Waymos that are part of the Uber network in Austin. And the dark blue area are human-driven cars. And as we can see, the volatility of demand is just really, really strong in this industry. People want to drive on Friday and Saturday, which makes a lot of sense. People drive much less in the middle of the day, which makes a lot of sense. People, want to go back from work in an Uber, but not necessarily to work in an Uber, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So because of that level of volatility of demand, it is not realistic that robotaxis will satisfy 100% of the demand. Because if that would happen, then your utilization rate on Monday would be absolutely terrible, just so you can satisfy all your customers on Friday and Saturday. So that's why I think that, some level or some combination between robotaxis plus human-driven is probably going to be the right answer. So which industries are going to be impacted? I think it's things like insurance industry, trial lawyers, et cetera, like people who have some level of dependency on all the collisions and everything that's going on when it comes to safety. If you have vehicles that almost never collide or are just incredibly safe, or the severity of injuries just so much easier, then that's going to have an impact on the insurance industry and bunch of other industries. On the flip side of that, it takes some time for this to happen, right? Like it is a fairly gradual process. It's going to take hundreds of thousands of robotaxis for robotaxis to be responsible for just 1% of all vehicle miles traveled in the US. So there's going to be still 99 that are less safe, human-driven, regular insurance, regular everything. But, that portion will gradually over time continue to shrink.
Martin, do you, to Mike's question, how did I mentioned you were IR at Tesla. How did the automotive companies think about this trend? How is it affecting them, or where are they putting capital? What's the feedback you get from them around all this?
I think, when you look at the global automotive demand has been basically flat for many, many years now. So we reached sort of some level of about 90 million vehicles sold per year globally. There was a huge growth driver from China, a decade ago, but where the market expanded from, 70 million to 90 million vehicles per year, but that has since stabilized. So it is clear, and if you look at the valuations of various automotive companies, it's no surprise that these companies are trading on, 6, 7, 10 times PE, because there is no growth, basically. And what this means, if the robotaxis ultimately become really, really cheap, we're talking $1 a mile, and they will absolutely get there. There's nothing that mathematically prevents them from getting there. If they become really, really cheap, then I think the first step will be people getting rid of their second cars, or not even purchasing their second car in the first place for young families, et cetera, because there's always this option that is a really, really good option. I think car ownership is here to stay for quite some time. I do think that people do want to own their cars. For various reasons, whether they have like child seats in the back or they have some stuff in the back that they keep carrying around. there's many reasons why, people want to own their own cars, not just use, Uber or Lyft for driving around. But I think especially with the younger generation, the purchasing of the second cars is going to become, less and less relevant. So I do worry about the whole automotive industry, the size of it. There's really two major things that are happening. Number one, China is taking a bigger and bigger chunk of the overall automotive industry. And number two, there's just going to be less need for own vehicles because, you will have these super utilized robotaxis that take quite a few vehicles off the car park.
So maybe, Martin, let's maybe try to, I hate to leave robotaxis because it's so interesting, but we got to get to humanoid robots too. One question for you. You mentioned China in all this. It's always the big question on almost everything. But what is stunning is, Chinese EVs. There was a Bloomberg piece this morning about how China might do to AI what it's done to EVs, and it went through you grow the industry, you mature it, you subsidize it, you make it really good, and then you export and you start wiping out other people's industry. All of this seems so tied to EVs. We can challenge that premise, but all this seems so tied to EVs, and EVs, China just looks so potentially dominant or predatory. Like, how could this play out 10 years from now? And you pointed out it's not good for just total vehicle production. What might this mean 10 years from now in terms of who are the dominant car manufacturers? How does this work with China and the rest of the world? Can you doomsday that for us a little bit? Because I painted it in a negative light. I don't have to, but it seems concerning.
Absolutely, it is. I think that at the moment, when we think about the global humanoid robot sales, it's nearly all of them, or the overwhelming majority of humanoid robot sales are humanoids that are designed and sold in China, and they're sold to top universities in the US, to a bunch of labs, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole world is buying these humanoid robots because the most dominant humanoid robot companies in the US, which are Boston Dynamics, Tesla, Bigger AI, they would have a closed system where they wouldn't be, at least at the moment, they wouldn't be selling this equipment to anyone. They want to keep it for themselves, keep perfecting the software, keep perfecting the hardware, and then at some point maybe lease them out. I think that we're sort of coming into a bit of a geopolitical debate here where, how sustainable is it that Chinese robots are sold in the US and US robots are sold in China? I think that it's hard to see a scenario where that would be allowed long term, just because, at some point, and I think we're not far from that, a humanoid robot can be treated in the same way as a military equipment. And as a result, the restrictions on this kind of machinery, I think, are going to go up significantly. So each region will want to build their own champions in this field.
Well, and I got us off on Chinese EVs and then nosed us into humanoids. But maybe quick question on humanoids as we turn more to that topic. I feel like, I don't know, I'll speak for the crowd, maybe you guys disagree, but you can look at the robotaxi, self-driving, autonomous stuff, and you go, boy, that just looks great. You can totally see how that's going to grow. When you look at the humanoid robot market, you kind of go, how good are these things going to get? How expensive are these things going to be? Is this really it's maybe not as obvious. I'll be guilty myself about how big that gets or how impactful that is that, what would you say, Martin, for our audience on that one, just like how much potential the humanoid robot technology and market has?
Yeah, I would say, incredibly high potential, but still very many years away. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. The reason why investors are so excited about humanoid robots is that it's the ultimate robotic machine that is backwards compatible with everything humans do. So it doesn't matter if it's, cleaning the house or, constructing the house or whatever it is that you might want to do as a human. A humanoid robot should be backwards compatible with that job. So it's like the ultimate TAM product. And of course, the challenge is, and we wrote quite a bit of research on this topic as well, the challenge is that today, the humanoid robots are used for the like 0.001% of the easiest tasks there are. And it's not like they're used successfully. It's not like they're like today replacing people on the assembly line, even with these very, very niche roles. That's still in the process of being tested. And I'm sure it's going to be possible to get there. But, having a job of moving one piece of metal from a rack and moving it into some kind of a machine is incredibly different than, putting together a wire harness or taking a screwdriver and, aiming the screwdriver exactly in the right spot, on the vehicle or on whichever machine that you're putting together. In other words, we are very, very close to mastering really the simplest manual tasks there are, but the tasks get exponentially more complicated from here. And the reason is that everything that's been automatable until now has been automated. So if there's something like truly repetitive, where there is a machine that we can design that will just do this repetitive thing, then in all likelihood, we've already designed it and somebody's doing it already, whether it's KUKA or, whichever other company. So we're now going into the area where we couldn't figure out how to automate it, or not in any simple way. And as a result, we need human to do it because there's just too much nuance. There's just too much finger dexterity or like whatever that might be. And those tasks are just like, many tens of times more complicated than the tasks that humanoid robots are doing. So I would still see this as this is a difficult problem to solve. One last thing that I would say on this topic, which I think is really important. Autonomous cars in themselves are very difficult to solve. Like, there's only a handful of companies in the world that can drive autonomous cars without a human on board. Like publicly, legally, and all of those things. It's like 6 or 7 companies globally. And we've had like 100+ companies that have been in the autonomous driving sector, trying to solve this puzzle. Autonomous cars have only 2 degrees of freedom. So that's your left, right, that's 1 degree, and gas, brake, that's the 2nd degree. That's it. And they have a perfect data set. And by what I mean by perfect data set is that you have cameras and lidars and radars and all of this equipment on your vehicle. And let's say you have a fleet of 1,000 vehicles or 1,000,000 vehicles. You record the perfect data set from every single vehicle. And the data set is fully comparable, one vehicle with the other. Imagine doing that for humanoid robots. So humanoid robots, instead of 2 degrees of freedom, have, 60+ degrees of freedom. And at the same time, it's not like you can just put a human with a camera somewhere here and, you start cooking or cleaning and all of a sudden the robot is getting a consistent data set. So those are, I think, the two biggest challenges is the data collection consistency. So we're going to have to use simulation instead. And it's the, 60 plus degrees of freedom compared to 2 degrees of freedom. It is a very difficult problem to solve.
I might jump in. I mean, agree. The degrees of freedom with this versus the driving technology is just a different animal. And so I guess I would ask you, in your mind, how do we actually get there? Is it like some of the software development that's been going on with like world models and things like that? Or is it some gradual journey where we start with, we started with automation that's already exists today. And then we sort of develop these like niche, robots that work on very niche, like specific tasks, and then sort of gradually move into this general human robotics? Or how do you see it developing over time to the point of actually getting to the point where you have humanoid robots that can do all of these disparate household tasks?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the whole topic of household humanoid robot, that's a whole different story, because in the household, it's not like a factory environment. In the household, you have babies and pets and,
Right.
toddlers running around, etc. Like the threshold for safety is multiple times higher than a threshold for safety in a warehouse or in a manufacturing facility. So, if we're many years away from seeing hundreds of humanoids at each factory, we're many, many more years away to see a humanoid in the same conditions. I think that, so what needs to happen? This is highly debated, but I think that there's really two separate things. One of them is exactly what you mentioned, world models. Like if it's not possible to gather data through video cameras on exactly, at every single task at the factory with enough precision, we're going to have to create world models that understand the physics and the movement and the dexterity and every single nuance, excuse me, that understand every nuance as perfectly as possible. And there are many companies working on world models, whether it's Google, Jan LeCun recently started his own startup in Europe building world models because he says LLMs are a dead end. There's many, many other companies who are going this path. So the question is, if we figure out world models and if we can create a synthetic world that acts 100% the same as the real world, is that going to solve humanoid robots? And the answer is to some extent. And the reason for that is that there's still a real to sim gap between what the world model says the answer is. So let's say the world model will say, I need to make this movement to pick up this phone. I need to, do some other movement to pick up a tissue or an egg. But there's something called a real to sim gap, which is the gap between what the software says a humanoid should do and between what humanoid robot actually does. So instead of moving your finger by 2.5 millimeters, the humanoid robot could move it by 4 millimeters, but that's already too much. So it would not do the right thing. So it's both the hardware as well as software that needs to keep developing in order to make this a possibility.
Yeah, Martin, I think that when I think about the autonomous market, it seems like that's a capitalistic industry where private equity, venture capital, or just, whatever will go out and they'll solve that issue. But I look at, humanoid robotics, it feels like there's a gray line between just the military, the government, private industry. Maybe talk about who's participating here. What do we need to really kind of advance this, from the next 20 or 30 years to maybe the next 5 or 10 years? I mean, what type of capital has to go into this business to basically accelerate it?
Absolutely. So, at the moment, humanoid robot companies are incredibly well capitalized. I think if we just look at examples like Figure AI, that raised billions of dollars at a valuation of nearly 50 billion. Tesla, of course, I think it's a significant part of Tesla's current valuation is the humanoid robot opportunity. So I think many of these, or at least some of these companies, are incredibly well capitalized. But I completely agree with you that once these robots go from somewhat capable and an impressive demo to incredibly capable and potentially, functioning on a battlefield, I think that's when the public and policymakers, et cetera, will really take a notice that, this is not the sort of machinery that just anyone can buy. Like that, this could end up in wrong hands very quickly, and the capability of such product is just too high to risk. So I agree that the world of policy will have a significant say in the market of humanoid robots at some point.
Well, maybe Martin, since you used the word policy, is there are so many interesting policy issues around technology. Do you find in your travels, is there a capital of great technology regulatory thinking, like really advanced? Like if you want to really think through all the issues around technology and policy, where does that sit?
So this is not a topic that I'm expert in. I'm usually, speak to my former colleagues at Tesla who give me some policy advice or some policy download, but it's not something that it's not an easy topic to navigate through. That's for sure. And I think things are changing incredibly quickly. I remember back in the day when Tesla was not able to sell cars in some parts of China because, every Tesla came with 8 cameras. And as a result, it could be basically a spy machine. If you have hundreds of thousands of these vehicles, they could be used in a way that the Chinese definitely did not want. And as a result, the company had to prove that there's a firewall between locally produced data in China and data that sits in the US. And I think we're just going to see more and more of this, just due to the capability and the surveillance capability of all of the machines that we're talking about.
Well, it's a fascinating space. As I remember, we had a drone expert on at one time, and it was clear that it seemed like one of the takeaways was the explosion of drone technology will be intimately related to fixing the regulatory environment so you can just have drones everywhere. I'm off on a tangent now, Martin, but you're getting us thinking here. We're going to lose you. It's coming up on an hour. This is fantastic. It shows this could have been a 5-hour miniseries, Martin. But maybe one last one, because you were Tesla IR, and so you saw this, and Mike mentioned this is earnings week, and public companies and technology and valuations and managing investor expectations, and we have some big values going on in the tech space today. I'm just curious, as you think about the public's interest in financing so much of this, and then having these great companies that, when you were a sell-side analyst, you somehow have to come up with a valuation framework. There's a question in here somewhere, Martin. I'm just kind of curious from your background, around all that. How do you look at it now and think about where we are in the tech valuation evolution?
It is fascinating, and it is kind of crazy to see many of the super cash generative, super successful tech companies are trading at very reasonable P multiples. And there are other companies that are trading on, 100x, 200x PE. Just so there's, huge discrepancy across the spectrum. And this is a topic that is probably not, I think, debated enough. And that is what I would call the power of a retail shareholder. And it is, I think, becoming increasingly clear that if a company, any company, has not only regular institutional investors, BlackRock Capital, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, the main institutional investors, but as a whole army of millions of retail shareholders who really have a 5 to 10 year view. They don't care about PE ratio. They don't care about that much about volatility. It really, the debate changes on what's the right valuation. Like, it's ultimately the demand versus supply element in this debate cannot be dismissed. And I think what happens quite often is that, we look at these companies and like, okay, XYZ companies trading on some crazy PE ratio, and like that has to correct. But it hasn't corrected in a very, very long time. It's been many, many years. And the reason is that there's a, 30, 40, 50% of the companies owned by retail, which are just really not that interested in some of the metrics that I think are very relevant, but they don't think they are. They just take a very, very long-term view. And I think that's, this is a underrated element that I think is incredibly important in this overall debate.
Martin, that's a great place to end. But I don't, Mike, I'm thinking about you because we've done 6 years of shows together. Ellen, we've done 2 shows together. But in terms of like a speaker where you thought, wow, we're hanging up and there was hours more to discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, Martin, you've lit our fire today, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. It was great to connect, and I'm sure we'll see each other soon.
Well, we can't wait. We are now customers, so we're using your research. We can't wait to spend more time with you, and we just really appreciate it. There's so much here to do together. So, thank you for joining, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.